Welcome to The Growth Kit, a podcast where science and actionable advice intersect to help you live a better life.
Hey everyone, Brian Comley here. Welcome to the Growth Kit podcast in a rare episode where I'm using my actual voice instead of a voiceover. So today's guest is someone I was really looking forward to talking to for a while. His name is Dean Stott, and he is a former British Special Forces soldier who served in the Special Boat Service, also known as the SBS. After a career-ending parachuting accident, he transitioned to the private sector and became renowned for handling high-risk situations, such as when he evacuated the Canadian embassy in Libya. He later set 2 world records for traveling the longest road in the world on a bike. It's the 14,000-mile Pan American Highway with basically no cycling experience, and he crushed it, doing it in 17 days faster than the previous world record. So he is now a motivational speaker, a podcaster, an adventurer, and a dad. He was also awarded the Distinguished Honor of the MBE, the Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, for his services in sport, humanitarian, and mental health. This interview was pretty incredible. I could have really just spoken to him for hours listening to his stories. He's a great storyteller. He has a humble demeanor, and he is just so inspiring. So hope you enjoy the episode. As always,
all right, Dean. So welcome to the Growth Kit, man. I am very, very excited to talk to you. I devoured your book, and I have so many questions for you. But to start, can you take me back to even before you joined the military and tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I was born. My father was in the military, and so I was born into that sort of military environment. I was known as what we call in UK, we're pads brats, which means you're a child of someone serving in the military, which means basically your life every 3 years you end up moving locations. I don't know what it's like so much here in the US, but with the UK, we tend to get posted every 3 years to a new location, whether that's Germany, somewhere in UK. And so as a child growing up, there wasn't really any sort of stability regards friendships, because every time you started to get your feet under the table and feel comfortable, your father then got posted to another location. So very much a pilgrim as a young age. It hasn't really stopped since growing up either. I always wanted to be a fireman, actually. I didn't want to be in the military. Although I was immersed in that environment. But it wasn't until actually I finished school, went to college, decided I didn't really want to be at college and just went surfing for 2 weeks. I've been surfing since a young boy. I have a real passion and love for the water. That 2 weeks turned into 6 months, which meant I ruined my education, as my father said. And long before the mobile phone, this was 1994, he then found me working in a surf shop in Newquay, in the southwest of the UK, and sort of challenged me what I was going to do in my life. I'd thrown away my education. And so, not really to silence him, I told him I'd join the military, but at the age of 17 at the time, you couldn't be a fireman until you're 18. But this in 1993, we had a big recession. And so in my local area, just for one firefighter job application, there was 2,000 applicants. So my mindset was, well, if I join the military, at least I can get some discipline, some fitness, and it'll help build my resume towards when I want to become a fireman. So that was my intentions of joining the military, was short term, build that resume. But that didn't turn out to be the case. As soon as my foot was in the door in the military, my path and direction sort of changed quite rapidly.
That's incredible. I remember in your book you mentioned, I know, like you said, the military was never really on your long-term plan list, but your dad was a military man, and he had some doubts about you joining the military. Why did he have them? And what was he talking to you about with that?
Yeah, so when my father, it was actually on that road trip back from when he picked me up at the surf shop, he was literally in my ear, and I said, well, I'll join the military. And I was expecting some warm, comforting words, but instead he told me I would last 2 minutes. So not really what I was expecting from my father at the time. But, at the time I probably weighed, wow, I was probably we work in kilos. I was about 67. No, I'm 90 kilos now. I was about 67 kilos and about 5'7". So I wasn't the stature and the physique that I am at the moment. I was very much a young, skinny boy at the time. So his words, last 2 minutes, I just use that. There's no point in arguing. I always find that, the best course of action is action itself. There's many times you'll come across this in your life where people will either be naysayers or argue that you can't do it. So the best course of action is actually just going doing it and proving them wrong. And so that Monday morning, actually, I went into the careers office and I came out and I went to my father's office, said, look, I'm joining the military. And from that point on, his attitude changed. I think he thought when I was having that conversation with him, it was just a throwaway comment that I would join the military. And that was his response. But when he actually saw that I was actually serious in my decision, he then was more supportive. But the fact that I still talk about it now, 30 years later, it says a lot about the power of words and how they can have impact on you. But I think it was reverse psychology. I think it was like, okay, your last 2 minutes, it was almost like, prove me wrong.
So you mentioned that a bunch in the book, and you obviously use that as fuel. And I've noticed in reading a lot of biographies and reading a lot about top performers, whether it's CEOs or musical artists, but especially like athletes and in the military, they use that criticism as fuel.
Oh.
And how have you found? I'm curious, actually, if he never said that to you, how do you think that would have changed your life? How much fuel was that for you?
At the time, it was the fuel to get me through the door, get me into that careers office. I think if he'd given me warm, comforting words and advice, like I say, it wasn't long from that initial comment to actually him then changing, going 180. It was the fact that, that was on the weekend. The Monday I was in the careers office. Yes, my father was also I always call him the Ted Lasso of the army. He was the soccer manager, player, and coach. But now, having watched Ted Lasso, is nothing like my father. My father was much more strict. But so his career was based around sporting abilities. So for my father, it wasn't so much he had expectations of me going to special forces, because I never even heard of the special forces at the time. It was just more the fact that I was actually going to go do something with my life. And so when he realized I was being quite serious in my decision, he was then very much guiding me in those early stages about what I should do and what I shouldn't do. We lived in Aldershot at the time, which is the home of the British Army. So it's probably like living in Fort Bragg, just surrounded by airborne guys. Everyone was in uniforms, and so, but I didn't really have an understanding of the military as a whole. Tier 1 special forces, tier 2 special forces, the support elements, and my father played soccer. And all I ever saw him do was put his boots on and his trainers and go train the guys. So that was my idea of the military. So when I went to the careers office and came back, you go in with an idea of what you want to do, but you end up being steered by whoever's the career manager. Unlike here in US, where you have like the Army, the Navy, and the Marines, some of ours are actually joint. They have them all in one place. And so really it's whoever's opening that door for you. They will obviously try and steer you to their local regiment or unit. Yeah. And so for me, it was the parachute regiment, which is the airborne. And so I went in and came back out, and I said to my father, I said, I'm joining the parachute regiment. He said, you're not. And he marched me straight back in. My father was in the Royal Engineers. And so in the Royal Engineers, you can get a trade. You can be a draftsman, you can be a plumber, you can be a bricklayer, you can do all these great trades. And my father was thinking at the time, get what you can from the military. Especially if you're in there in a short period, don't let them use you. You use them. You get as much from them as possible. But I wasn't aware that in the Royal Engineers, you could also be airborne engineers. You can be a commando engineer. So you could still do that and continue that path. So basically it's being non-infantry. You have a trade. And so, he marched me straight back in, and then I joined the Royal Engineers. And then it was like, I did this touchscreen test, and they said, look, you can choose whatever you want to do within that. And within our Royal Engineers as well, we also have bomb disposal. So this was 19, I was doing this touchscreen test in 1994. This is long before Afghanistan and Iraq, when you hear about IEDs and stuff like that. Bomb disposal was more, as they still do now in the UK, diffusing disposal ordnance from like World War II that we have off the coast, or just wash up on the beach. We have still a lot of that in the UK now, which Americans aren't really used to. So so that's what I was at. So I thought, well, that sounds good. The girls will find that quite sexy. So yeah, I came back and told my dad I was joining bomb disposal, and he said, "No, you're not," and marched me straight back in. And then he said, "Yeah, this is what you need to be doing." So I sort of thank him for that as well, is that he sort of really steered those initial decisions. But actually, long term, it didn't really matter, because I then went off on my own path anyway.
Yeah, so tell me about that. So you join the military. It's you're less familiar with that. I don't know what expectations you have, but they're not as close to reality as you might learn.
Yeah, well, the start for me was training. It was just the basic training. I talked about my height and weight in a short period of time, but 18 months later, I was then 90 kilos and 5'11". I'd grown. I'd put on 23 kilos. Yeah, so physically, I was growing from a young boy into a man, but mentally, I was getting stronger as well. When I started, I was finishing the courses, but I wasn't like middle of the group, or I was actually at the top from the off, which was giving me a lot of confidence. And so each time I then went into a course, I was like, well, how good can I be? I mean, I didn't realize I was, one of the better students on every course that I went on. And it's like, well, what next? My first posting, because of my father's career, that my surname's Stott. It's quite a rare surname. It's not a common surname in the UK. So it wasn't long before people from the Royal Engineers put two and two together and realized my dad was Dave Stott. And they're like, "Oh, you play soccer." So I got sent to Germany, to a unit called 2-8 Engineer Regiment, who were the Army soccer champions in Germany. And so my career, so I ended up working in the gym as a physical training instructor, just playing soccer all the time for about a year. So every day we would be on the AstroTurf from 8 in the morning to noon, and then we'd rest for the rest of the day. It's almost like being a semi-pro footballer. But I soon realized after a year, I was actually just following my father's path completely. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. So I volunteered for the All Arms Commando course, which is Tier 2 Special Forces, and went off, joined the commandos. And yeah, then that sort of changed the direction. I put sport behind me, and sort of went on more the career path of the military. And I, at the age of did the commando course, joined 5-9 Commando, then became reconnaissance. And so in a short period of time, we call them badge collectors. I was also a diver. I'd done every arduous course that you could do within the Royal Engineers. I was Tier 2 Special Forces. And I spent a lot of time there. I spent a good period of time there. I ended up going back as an instructor on the commando course. I ended up being an instructor at the dive school. I was the senior dive instructor. So in that period, I was learning a lot about myself. I was learning a lot from other peers, good leaders and bad leaders, as I say. Having done a lot of courses myself as a student, when I went back as an instructor, I didn't want to replicate how I was treated as a student and how my instructors were treating me. I saw the good and bad in leadership and sort of changed that as well.
That's incredible. So you also joined the Special Boat Service. Can you talk about that and talk about how it compares to the military in the U.S. and how the parallels with the tiers come out to be?
Yeah, so I think there's some big difference in the UK and US. Like we call it Tier 2 Special Forces, I've mentioned them, in Tier 1 Special Forces. I think here in the US, you have Special Forces, and then you have a thing called Special Mission Units, which is the equivalent to Tier 1. So the Commandos and the Parachute Regiment I was referencing back in the UK, they're like your Navy SEALs, your Rangers, your Green Berets, your airborne guys. And then the SBS and the SES, which we go on to now at Tier 1, are your SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. It's the Special Forces then need to do another selection process. And we have we have a 95% attrition rate. We started selection with 200 guys and 8 pass. And they're special forces guys that fail. So it literally is the best of the best. Yeah, and the SBS, what was unique about me, I came from an army background. And so for the SBS of old, you could only join the SBS if you're a Royal Marine. There was 100% Royal Marine candidates. But SAS, Special Air Service, which is equivalent to Delta, you can join from Army, Navy, or Air Force. You had that option. But the SBS were losing a lot of candidates to the SAS because a lot of the guys didn't like diving from the Marines. So they would choose that option. So the recruitment pool for the SBS was a lot smaller than what it was in the SAS. But unlike here in the US, where SEAL Team 6 have their own selection process, Delta Force have their own selection process, ours is joint. It's UK Special Forces. SAS and SBS is together. It's not that one is easier or harder than the other. It's exactly the same. So you're being tested. So at least at the end when you're working with your SAS counterparts or they're working with SBS that you've all gone from the same process. There's none of this rivalry about who's the best. You've all gone through the hardest selection process in the world. But for me, so the SBS had decided to open their doors tri-service so they could get candidates other than the Royal Marines. And I'd spent 8 years with 3 Commander Brigades in reconnaissance working with the Royal Marines anyway. I mean, I was also now the senior dive instructor for the Army at the Defence Diving School. So being underwater is where I was comfortable. So much to the disgust of my friends in the SAS, because I had a lot of friends in the SAS, I decided I was going to go down the special boat service route. And as I touched on before, we had 200 star, eight finished 6 months later, and I was one of those candidates. But I think now 15% of the special boat service comes from non-Royal Marine candidates. Okay. Yeah. And I don't think and that's nothing to do with my contribution, or it was, yes, obviously people knew there was the option, but during the height of the conflicts, the Afghan and Iraq war, what we did differently is the SAS ran Iraq and the SBS ran Afghanistan. And so literally when Iraq was tapering off, a lot of guys wanted to go where the action was. And so that again helped with the recruitment process.
Okay. So you say starting from 200, I imagine incredible elite candidates whittled down to 8 over a 6-month period. What were some of what I know about military intense elite training is what I see from Bud's training and what I see in like Full Metal Jacket. Yeah. What are some of the most intense things that really whittle everyone down? And what makes you stand apart? The people that survive, what makes them stand apart?
What's really interesting, like what you just mentioned there, Buds and Full Metal Jacket, you'll see an instructor screaming and shouting at you. That's what's normally done on tier 2 special forces. So like, as you mentioned, the Buds, the Rangers, our airborne commando courses, that's where you get a lot of instructors shouting at you. But what they're looking at doing on those courses, they're dwindling out the weaker candidates, but they're trying to build you up as a team. Trying to build that camaraderie. And so that's what's really focused on the tier 2. Tier 1 special forces, the instructors don't even shout at you. The course is hard enough as it is that they don't need to shout at you. So this whole perception you see on the TV where screaming and shouting, that's done earlier. And so with tier 1, the big difference is you have to be self-motivated. The physical stuff is way beyond what you've done before. But you don't have an instructor shouting at you, because some people use that as a motivation. Some people like to be praised and told they're doing well or be shouted at. When you're on your own behind enemy lines, you won't have an instructor with you. So that's what they're looking for. They're testing you on different attributes on tier 1 special forces. You've come from units where you were probably the top dog within your unit. You're now coming across these guys who are all top dogs. And so you're no longer at the front of the pack. You're no longer doing really well. So how do you deal with failure? How do you deal with those sort of things? And so there's a lot of things there. And they're not always the most physical guy. You could be the fittest guy in your unit, and you could be the fastest guy across the hills doing 30 miles with all the kit. But if you are unable to then operate that kit at the other end, you're looking for individuals. Yes, they're physically capable, they're self-motivated, but they can retain information. It's the intelligent soldier that is the tier 1 special forces.
That's incredible. In the book, you wrote about, like you're saying, with the kit, what I call rucking. In the U.S. military, they call it Rocky, I'm sure a lot of similarities, but tell me some of the more arduous challenges they had you do. And can you tell the story about when the instructors had you put more rocks into your rucksack?
Yeah, so they tell you on selection to be the gray man. So the gray man means is basically you blend in. You don't stand out for reasons that are good or bad. You know, don't want to be bringing any attention to yourself, especially in the early stages of selection. But as the numbers dwindle later on, you know, they're obviously going to know who you are, especially when there's 8 left from 200. So, you know, you don't want to be bringing that attention to day one of a 6-month course. You know, I'm literally in the first hour, we parade up on the on the car park. We sat on our rucks. We're waiting for our numbers to be handed out, and my name gets called out straight away. And I'm like, here we go. And basically it was, why are you going SBS? It was the SAS instructors, because they weren't happy. They're like, because I don't know whether it's because, you know, the unit I come from, we had 100% pass rate, you know, whether, you know, is this going to open up floodgates for others? Or there was just general interest. Why the SBS, not the SAS? And so for me, my easy answer was, well, I like diving. And they're like, it's not a good enough answer. So the first month, as you touched on, was rucking. You're on your own, you get given a map, and you're going from A to B. And it starts off with slightly lesser weights, about 50 pounds. And then you build up over the 4 weeks to like 75 pounds. That's minus your water and your cold weather clothing as well. But the distances as well start increasing. You know, our final one on the last day is we do about 25 kilometer, which is on test week. We do a 25 kilometer march in the day. I mean, the final one, you have to do 40 miles in 20 hours on your own through the night, you know, and so, but you've already done 4 weeks of this back to back, you know, and it slowly builds you up. But you go to checkpoints on the hills, you know, you have your start point, and they give you your next grid, and you need to get there. And so every time, and all the checkpoints are on the top of mountains. You always start at the bottom and on the top, and you make your way across the mountains. So every time I go to this checkpoint, there's two certain instructors from the SAS. One was called Nasty Nick, and the other one was called Mick. And I won't give their surnames, I'll recognize them as well. But they were from my previous units, from the engineers. And they were like, right, Stotty, why are you going SBS? I said, I like diving. I said, no, poor answer, you know, grab a rock. So I'd have to stick this rock into my day sack. They take a photo of it and obviously let the instructor at the end know that it was still in there. And so this would go on for like the first 2 weeks of this 4-week rucking phase. And I'm like, I need a better answer than this. And so so Hereford, where the SAS are based, is in the middle of England. It's quite dull there. It's very wet a lot of the time. It's on the Welsh border. I mean, the SBS are based in Poole. It's almost like Coronado. You've got Coronado Island and Fort Bragg. You know, it's like that basically. So I Googled that weekend, and we have a great beach called Bournemouth Beach, very popular in the summer, very touristy place. And I Googled Bournemouth Beach heat wave, and there was a whole page of like these young women topless sunbathing on this beach. So I was like, right, printed that off, laminated it so it was waterproof, and stuck it in my mat pocket. And then on the Monday, I was up on the hill, same question. So I put the weapon on my foot, and I took this picture out. I said, because that's not in Hereford. And they're like, that's a good answer. You know, it was and so from that point on, I kept that in my mat pocket, you know, all the way through those phases, through the jungle phase, interrogation, all the way through. So if I was ever asked that question again, I had it to hand. But what they're also testing, you know, that's another test of your attributes. They're testing that, you know, it is dark, you know, it is dark. They are testing you, they're pushing you, and you don't react, you don't show any emotion, but you have a good sense of humor. You know, that's what they like. They're looking for people like that. So yeah, I have to remember that they're just testing you. It's nothing personal.
That's incredible. So your military career ended nowhere near the way you anticipated it ending. You had the way you described it in the book was incredible. The way you were injured and had to be forced out of the military. Can you talk about what happened?
Yeah, so I was just about to deploy on another Afghan tour, and we were out in Oman doing pre-deployment training. And what we do there, we practice all the methods of insurgents that we do, and we were doing a hey-ho jump, which is a high altitude, high opening jump. So unlike skydiving, you're still actually attached to the aircraft. You jump out the aircraft, about 15,000 feet, which is the limits of before you go onto oxygen. And as you exit the aircraft, you do your compulsory count, 1 to 5, and then your chute should be open. And then you're then traveling. And at that height, you can travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes flying time in the air, especially in Oman, because you have the heat coming off the ground. It's very hard to come down sometimes. And I mean, you travel to the target area. So it's a method insertion that we have as an option when we're on the ground. And we'd done this before on operations on the previous tour, but we had some new guys coming through selection. So, we all jumped with those guys to show support, and it's always good training. But I think it was the third or fourth jump of the day. I can never really remember. And I exited the aircraft, and there was something wrong straight away, because when I did my count, I had my eyes open. I actually wasn't looking in the right way. I was looking up at my foot, which was caught in the lines above my head. So I was frantically trying to clear my leg in time, because I know that the parachute is going to soon go taut and open. And I couldn't clear it in time, and my leg got pulled over my head and to the right. And then thankfully my heel cleared from the line and didn't take my leg completely off. But straight away I knew from the pain there was something wrong, because of the pain was that bad. I was vomiting because of the pain, but because the air was so thin, I was also drifting in and out of consciousness at the time. But when I was coming to, and then as I started descending, the air was getting a lot thicker. So it was, I was more conscious. But I could see, I had a chute open and I was traveling in the right direction with the stick. I had communications with the guys, but there's no point in coming up on the radio and telling them I had a sore leg, because there's actually nothing they can do until we get on the ground anyway. So, and that was my next problem, was actually landing it. I thought, well, I've only got one good leg, and so I need to land this well. So I flew over the DZ, and I could see the guys' approaches, who was having a good approach and bad. And they stick like a NATO T on the ground. So ideally you want to be coming in and facing the T in that direction. So on the ground, they give you an indication of where the winds are. So I came in and I landed perfectly, landed one-legged. It was a great landing. But unfortunately, the damage sustained on the exit, prevented me going on that tour, and actually prevented me going on any other tour again. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep. So all the supporting muscles as well. So yeah, it wasn't like saying up 16 years after being, 16 years in the military. I never had any ambitions of leaving the military at all. For me, I was a lifer. I would have stayed in now as a late entry officer and just be sat at a desk, enjoying life. But life gives you these curveballs.
So 16 years later, 16 years in the military, and such an abrupt end. Where did you take it from there? I know this obviously wasn't part of your plan, but talk about the surgery and the recovery, and then how you transitioned from there.
Yeah, well, the surgery, there was a whole spiral of errors in my medical documents. It took me like 40 weeks to get the surgery, and so that was a frustration for me as well, is that, you've gone from being one of the top guys to they don't see any use in you anymore. And so you end up at the bottom of the pile. And, thankfully for me, my wife was very entrepreneurial. She was a bank manager when I met her, and we knew I was going to be transitioning out. And so we had to look at what was the next sort of path. And because it was normally when you're leaving the military, from 2 years out, you start doing your transition, you do all your interviews and start, do your education stuff. I didn't have that. It was literally, you're out the door. And so, without sounding like Liam Neeson, people with our particular skill sets end up working in the private security sector. And so my wife set up the BlackBerry on her BlackBerry, our first security company. But, as well, I sort of skip over it. I was going through a bit of an identity crisis. I got to where I was because of my physical attributes and stuff like that. I now couldn't even run 100 meters without my knee giving way. To add to the pressure, Alana was now 8 months pregnant with our first daughter, when I left the military. So I was worried whether there's any jobs out there, how was I going to support her? So there was a lot of distractions and other things to be worrying about. But, thankfully, within 48 hours of leaving the military, I got a phone call to do a big private security job in Libya in the Middle East, because it was now the Arab Spring in May 2011. And so I was asked if I can help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi. So for me, there was that comfort knowing there's actually work out there. But that sort of really paused any sort of rehabilitation. You know, I didn't have time to rehabilitate. I literally got operated on from the military, and then I left, and then I was off. I then had to start supporting my family.
Man, so you went rogue. So you went started your own private security company, which you're still participating in today, I believe.
Yeah.
So what was that like starting that? And from what I know about private security, it's not much. It's movies of Liam Neeson, James Bond, and all
Yeah.
this.
I always say, you know, Hollywood, you know, I would point up the road because it literally is up the road for me at the moment. You know, Hollywood is, you know, it's the same with the special forces. It's the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs. They make it out to be this like private military contract, and it's totally the opposite of that. You know, to be a very good security operator, you actually go from that sort of lifestyle in the special forces to, I would say, being the biggest coward. You know, you should never get yourself into a situation because you should have already preempted it and, you know, gone around that, especially when you're working with these clients. But I looked at where the money was. You know, in the security industry, the risk reward ratio isn't balanced at all. You know, you could be an Afghan in Iraq or working off the coast of Somalia doing this anti-piracy on 50% of what you could be earning with private clients on their private jets and super yachts and things like that. So that's where, you know, I didn't want to be, you know, taking those risks or competing with some of my friends. A lot of them were working on the east coast of Africa. So I was trying to find a niche within the industry. And so that job, I helped set up that job in Benghazi. And I soon identified that the Libyans didn't want it being another Afghanistan and Iraq. Gaddafi was still alive. He was in Tripoli at the time. And they had in our hotel foyer, you had all these groups, you had all these NGOs, oil and gas companies, you know, I call them the big five security companies, multi-billion-pound organizations. Excuse me. And I was listening to them, and they were like getting these people to sign up for these crisis management and evacuation plans when I'm like, they weren't actually in place. There's nothing in place at all. And they were charging 6-7-figure sums. You know, they're working alongside these insurance companies, these brokers. And I was like, so I said to my wife, and I went back 2 weeks later, Lana gave birth to our daughter. And I said, look, and I have an idea, you know, I want to sort of focus on this area of crisis management and evacuations because I think some people are going to fall foul of this soon. And so there was a huge proliferation of weapons. I flew back in, bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, spent a month in the desert, put comms kit there, money. And we lived in Aberdeen, which is the oil and gas capital of Europe. So it's like Houston. So I had access to a lot of the oil companies, especially the smaller subsidiary companies that were working in Libya. And I just sold that plan to them on a retainer, hopefully never needing to use it. And then I was very fortunate, you know, Lana's, as we touched on, very entrepreneurial. I didn't have pressure from her that I needed to be bringing in money regularly, you know, so each job was ad hoc. But each time I was getting a job, it was a different country. It was a different type of work. And so we're soon really building up a whole picture on the security industry. You know, when you tell people in the security industry and, you know, I talk about biceps, bullets, and bombs. They look at you with tattoos and your bald head and broken nose. They think you're a doorman from the local nightclub. You know, private security is everything from surveillance, close protection, consulting, maritime security, cyber security. It's a huge beast. And so I was learning a lot, about cultures of countries, really building up a great network. And so, you know, one phone call, I would be training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. The next one, I'm in London in a 5-star hotel with the Olympics, with the American Olympic team. You know, it's like, it was night and day, but learning so much about this industry.
That's incredible. So can we go back to that burying the comm kits and the guns for a second? What happened with that? And are they still there? Did you ever have to use them?
I had to use the plan, but I didn't have to use the weapons, if that makes sense. So the first time I had to use the plan, I just finished the London Olympics in 2012, and I was out in Benghazi. And I don't even remember, September 11th, 2012, the American ambassador got killed, and they did a movie called 13 Hours. So I was there that evening in Benghazi. I always say right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time. And so I was asked if I could help evacuate a German oil company from Benghazi back to Tripoli. So I turned up, got these German oil engineers, but rather than taking like the coastal road, which is, you know, from Benghazi to Tripoli, that's going to cause you issues because in you know, in Libya, you have 167 tribes. You know, there's a lot of tribal influences as well. So you're not going to be able to get drivers from Benghazi through Misrata all the way to Tripoli. The drivers themselves are going to cause you issues. And so I had a safe house down in Zella, which is southwest of Benghazi, about 3 hours. So we ended up driving there, stayed at the safe house, and I had weapons at the safe house, but I didn't let them know that. But it was just more if we needed them, they were there. And we stayed there. We stayed static for 36 hours. And like I said, when we were in Benghazi that evening, we didn't know what was unfolding. We just knew there was a lot of trouble. We didn't know the fallout from it. We didn't realize the American ambassador got killed and all these other American agents. And so when we were there, what it does, it gave us an idea to really understand what was going on. But unbeknown to the engineers and the drivers from Benghazi, I had other drivers coming in from Tripoli because they would then take us onwards. And because of the success of that, you know, we got them back safely. Because of the success of that, I didn't need to use the weapons. You know, 2 years later, you know, it always seems to be at the back end of a sporting event. I was in Brazil covering the Soccer World Cup with Visa. And this is now July 2014. I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy saying, everyone's gone. Your name keeps coming up. You're the go-to guy. And so I flew back in. It was now the Tripoli War, which was a civil war between the militias and the government. A lot of the embassies had shut shop, but the Canadians were still there. And the reason they were still there, they were collapsing their embassy. They had no intentions of coming back. And so sort of missed that window of opportunity. So I flew back in and I helped with the planning, and single-handedly as a private security guy evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Tripoli all the way back to Tunis. And I always joke, it sounds sexy, sounds very Hollywood, but never had to use any weapons at all. It's understanding the demographics, the politics, and the tribal influences. Like I said before, it's more intelligence-led. You don't want to be getting into any of these sort of firefights. You know, I had a great fixer who's from those local regions. You know, the British embassy got shot at the week before when we took the Canadians out, and this was worrying the Canadians. So I went out with my fixer, and rather than speak to the young guys at the checkpoints with the weapons, we sat down with the elders, and basically it was all about a matter just respect and communication. Told them who we are, told them what our intentions were. There were no threat. Told them when we were coming through. And we had no issues at all. Sat down, shared bread and coffee with them. And what turns out with the British the week before, they didn't even slow down. They just smashed through the barriers. So no wonder they got shot at, because no one knew who they were. So our approach is, although very successful, is very different. It's not always going in with 8 guys that look like they're special forces with body armors and weapons. You know, that itself can have the negative response. It's literally, and as I do, I try and use as many locals as I can. You know, that makes it a lot easier. It's their country. They know their country better than I do. And sort of, I'm very much reliant on their intelligence and their knowledge to help me through.
It's incredible. So I imagine as you're developing this successful career as a international security consultant, you're not biking a lot. How the heck did you transition to that, what you were doing internationally, to your family life, which is obviously overseas, to starting this career, or not career, but attempting this world record-breaking performance?
Yeah, so that the pinnacle was probably the Canadian embassy, which I touched on. You know, so that was, that was about 3.5 years. That was a few years after I got out of the military. So I literally just focused, when I came back from that trip, my wife, Alana, sat me down. She's a business partner. She'd highlighted only being home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And,
I'm sorry to interrupt. You have one child at this time?
At that time, we still had Molly. Yeah, Molly. So Molly was coming up. Yeah, Molly was 3 years old at this point. And so, majority of her early life, I was away. And so what it was the second pin had dropped. I hadn't come to terms with the fact that I'd left the special forces. I was still trying to match that adrenaline rush that I had when I was in there, without realizing actually I was taking some high risks on these missions. If something had gone wrong, I didn't have a whole Sabre squadron coming to get me. I didn't have helicopters and such. You know, I was on my own. But no, I was confident with the plan. But and actually, what it was a lack of communication between me and my wife. My wife thought I wanted to be away, you know, to be physically active and engaged, and I thought she wanted me to be away so I could be earning money. You know, money actually wasn't even an issue. She was she had a successful property development business at the time. I didn't need to be taking these risks. So we sat down, we drank 2 bottles of wine and a bottle of port that night, and soon realized that actually we got the yin and yang balance completely wrong. You know, chapter 16 in my book, it's called Dead or Divorced. That was the conversation we were having. You know, if I continued this lifestyle, I would either be dead or I would be divorced. And, you know, I didn't want to be divorced. So, and I didn't want to be dead. So I had to change that. So I took a sabbatical from the security industry. My wife, as I said, was a property developer. She said, look, come work with me. My injured leg now, like I said, because I'd literally got this surgery, went straight into the private security sector, neglected my own sort of physical and mental well-being. My injured leg now was about, you guys work in pounds, it's about, you know, it was 4.4 pounds. You know, it's 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. And so I just bought a push bike off Amazon. Never really cycled before. You know, I cycled as a young boy on a BMX and things like that, and used to play around with my pals and stuff like that, but never saw anything of any distance. And I just bought this bike off Amazon, just cycled to and from the office. It's only about 8 miles there, 8 miles back. But being physically active again, I felt this huge weight off my shoulders. It was nice to get the lungs going. But you can tell, you know, with my backstory, sat in these architects and planners meetings with my wife, you know, and we now had our second child, Tommy. He was born. And so I'm sat in the corner, bottle feeding him while Alana's running all these meetings. And I'm like, yeah, I'm bored, you know, and she could see that I was physically, you know, I know, see that glaze in my eyes. She could look, you need to do something to keep yourself physically, mentally engaged. And so, yeah, I decided then, I said, well, I always fancy doing a world record. And she said, well, what in? I said, excuse me. I said, it was about a month before my 40th birthday. I said, well, I've always fancied, always remember as a young child reading the Guinness Book of Records and being fascinated with all these achievements. I said, well, a world record would be good. And Alana and I as well were sort of skim over, you know, since leaving the military, we did a lot in the non-profit space as well. So we were doing a lot, you know, we were ambassadors for the Special Boat Service Association, which is the non-profit charity for my old unit. You know, I was ambassador for the Royal British Legion, which is the oldest veteran charity in UK. You know, so we were doing all this. And so I said, well, look, I would like to give back. I said, let's do a world record. She said, what in? I said, well, cycling seems to be good because it's not hurting my knee. I had to find something that my injury wasn't going to sort of hold me back on. And living in Scotland, I thought she was going to choose like east to west coast of Scotland. You know, my wife then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, which is 14,000 miles. And so, having only cycled 20 miles sounds quite arrogant. I applied for the world record. I said, yeah, that sounds good. So I applied for the world record for this road. It's called the Pan American Highway. And, you know, Guinness came back 6 weeks later and said, yeah, you've been successful on your application. Your application is almost like, it's not a guarantee. It's like a pitch. It's like a pitch for a job, but really sort of focused on the charity angle and the fact that I was new to cycling, which was unique.
That's incredible. So you pick up this Guinness Book of World Record challenge. You've barely ridden your bike, and you're committed to raising, I believe it was $1 million, £1 million for a charity. So where do you start? What's the first step from there?
Yeah, so we didn't really know what the challenge, what campaign we were going to do it for. So when Guinness came back and said you've been successful in the application, you know, that's probably one of the hardest things, getting through that hurdle. And so, as I said, Lana and I done a lot of stuff in the non-profit space, but a good friend of mine, you know, I'll name drop him now, is Prince Harry. We've been friends 17 years. You know, we were on a JTAC course together back in 2007. Him and I had done a lot of stuff in the non-profit space behind the scenes. You know, he used to come as a guest on our table at a few events. I ran an intelligence fusion cell in Mozambique and Tanzania to identify the smuggling routes for the ivory, and used to disseminate that to him because he worked a lot in that space. And so he was the first person I called. I said, look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. You know, what campaign should we do it for? And at the time, he was this was 2017. Him and his brother and Kate were just about to launch. No, this was 2016. I messaged him actually. Him and his brother and Kate just about to launch a mental health campaign in 2017 called Heads Together, which is a mental health campaign, which had a collaboration of 11 mental health charities. So I'd seen firsthand in the military how mental health affected the guys with PTSD and such. But I wasn't aware until obviously getting involved with this campaign, how big it involved the whole of society. You know, young pregnant women, postnatal depression, young children, teenagers with social media, all the way through to fully grown adults. And so, yeah, I said, that's perfect. So that's the campaign we'd do it for. Got introduced to the Royal Foundation, who were sort of heading this up at the time. And they're like, you know, how much are you looking to raise? And I just came out of £1 million because I just wanted to keep them at the seat. I didn't want them just walking out the room. But also had to reflect the enormity of the challenge as well. You know, you can't say, right, I'm going to run the London Marathon and raise £1 million. It just doesn't, that ratio doesn't work. But this ratio does. The world's longest road. I mean, they're like, well, what is the message you're trying to promote? And this is, I had no plan for this as that. Well, you know, Harry told me, I didn't say Harry told me to come in, but I was thinking about it. And then I was like, I'll tell you what, I said physical activity helps your mental state, you know, because that's what I was just thinking internally, how it was helping me. And then I was told, you know, this, you know, but again, this is 2016, you know, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? I said, because it's not been scientifically proven. You know, obviously now, and I said, well, look, I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm training. So I ignored them anyway and carried on really pushing that message. And now, you know, post event and, you know, a few years later, everyone realizes it is one of the coping mechanisms for mental health. So I'm glad that I stuck to that message. So yeah, that was how we ended up with the challenge, the campaign. And then going from there, you know, I had to learn quickly about cycling. You know, it evolved so much from a young boy in a BMX. It's a multi-billion-pound industry. And I was buying magazines and reading books about the Pan American Highway, but I wasn't getting that crucial information I needed for planning. And so, you know, one of the reasons the UK Special Forces is best in the world is not because we have the best training, best caliber of guys and things like that. It's because we're always learning, we're always evolving, we're learning from our mistakes. We're always, you know, one of the things we used to do when we came off the ground on either on exercise or operations or anything we did, any training module that we did was what's called a hot debrief. And a hot debrief, I think Americans sometimes call it a wash up and, you know, things like that. Is like 3 simple questions: what worked, what didn't work, and if we were to do that again, what would we do differently? So I reached out to the previous record holders, and, you know, they were forthcoming, and I literally asked them those 3 questions. And they all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina. But all their issues I found were in South and Central America, be it bureaucracy, languages, spares for the bikes. So I'm like, from a planning perspective, I was like, well, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why not address those issues early, get them out the way? And then when you're in North America, you got North America, Canada, and then back into America again in Alaska. So one of the things I did, I turned it on its head. Just because they started in Alaska and finished in Argentina, that wasn't the route I was going to do. I was going to go the other way around and attack those elements first. So that really helped me with the planning side of the operation. The training wise, you know, there's a bike ride called Le Jog, Land's End John O'Groats, which is from the bottom end of UK to the top end of UK. It's like the equivalent of cycling from LA to Portland. It's about the same distance, about 940. Okay. Yeah, 940 miles. And Harry and I did a promo video together to really push this campaign. And when we finished recording, he said, what training are you going to do? And this is the early stages. I said, well, I might do Land's End John O'Groats. He said, would I do it with some of the members of the Invictus Games? I said, yeah, of course. And that's like in 6 months' time. So I started training for that. And I thought, well, you know, the Pan American Highway is 15 Land's End John O'Groats back to back, you know, just to understand the enormity it is. And so if I can't do one, how am I going to do 15? So having only cycled 2 weeks, I went off and did it. You know, I found a magazine, I did it in 9 days, did it right in the middle of winter. I did everything completely wrong. You know, I crashed the bike, you know, broke my thumb. You know, the bike I had was the wrong bike. You know, I just bought another bike off the shelf at a shop. You know, everyone was like, well, you're not bike fit. And I was thinking bike fit was fitness. when actually bike fit is your measurements to your bike, giving you the best the best advantage. Didn't know anything about cadence, did everything completely wrong in the cycling world, but still did it. But what? And it was the hardest bike ride I did. But what I was trying to, for me mentally, is how can I do 15 if I can't even do one? And so that moment on, my wife then found a decent training coach who was actually local, a guy called Ken Bryson. He trained the Scottish team, triathlon team. And I went into here to see him. And, you know, again, I looked like this, and he's like, you know, he just sort of big, bold guy, muscly guy. And he's like, I said, look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road and break 2-world record. And he said, look, I believed you when you told me. And, you know, and he fully supported and started training me. So when 6 months later, when I did Land's End John O'Groats again, you know, I understand it's on a lot of people's bucket list in UK. It's huge. For me, it was a training ride, and I had to approach it in that mindset. But then, you know, it was so much easier. I knew about cadence. It was a breeze. It was a breeze, but at least I knew I was on the right path.
Right, right. So you talk about 14,000 miles. That's incredible in itself. But then you talk about things I didn't even consider. There's obviously you're going through a desert. You're going over incredible mountains in South America. You are your crew, part of your crew kind of quit. You're going through different checkpoints, and you're going through across borders. The wins what that you started out with were incredible. Talk to me about some of that and how your end date kept changing.
Yeah, so as you touched on there, you know, when I was looking at, we had everything from plus 47 degrees centigrade in the Atacama Desert to minus 18 degrees centigrade in Alaska. I mean, every other type of weather experience you can encounter in between. You know, that wasn't too bad. I trained in Dubai for 2 weeks, so I knew what I was like in the heat. You know, I was very fortunate in the military to have operated in the jungle, the desert, the Arctic. So I've been in it, but I'd never done it on a bike. So, you know what I mean? So I where I could, I tested myself in those environments before I went on the event. You know, so I went to Dubai for 2 weeks. You know, Central America is like 90% humidity. You know, I went to Thailand and I didn't do cycling, but I did some CrossFit training there. So I knew what it was like on the body. Altitude as well. You know, the biggest climb on like the Tour de France is like 21 to 23 kilometers. My biggest climb in Ecuador is 67 kilometers from sea level to 4,500 meters and, you know, 4,500 feet a day. So it's like, I literally had to try and replicate those before I did it on the bike ride. And there's certain things you just can't factor. As you touched on the winds, I lived in Aberdeen in Scotland, which is like Chicago. It's the windy city, but nothing like I'd seen in the bottom end of the earth down there. So there's things that I could train for, and there's things that are just totally out of your control. There's nothing you can do. You just need to do it. But as you touched on, you know, I was tired. My support team was tired. You know, there was issues there, having to send people home. I had the medic I found out was bullying the documentary team on day 13. It then lands on my lap. You're doing a mental health campaign, and then you've got this going on in your own camp. So had to intervene, send him home, you know, sort of trying to deal with egos, really. You know, I sort of joked that the bike ride was the easiest part. When you're managing all these other issues behind the scenes, that's what caught me out. But the world record was 117 days, and I was aiming for 110 days. And it wasn't because I wanted to smash it by a week. You know, when I was looking at all these potential scenarios and situations, there was things that were out of my control, natural disasters, coups. Actually, when I went through Nicaragua, 4 weeks later, there was a coup. So I missed that by 4 weeks. And then third party influence, like I said, dealing with support team and just niff-naff and trivia. So I aimed for 110 days. The first week, as we touched on, was really windy. But I made sure I was hitting my targets. I just stayed on the bike till I hit the target for the day. So by the end of the first week, I think I was a week into it. I think I was 36 miles behind target, but my target was still a week ahead of the world record. So still ahead. Then after that, the situation changed. The winds changed. The weather got better. I was getting, you know, I mean, as I started progressing, I was getting fitter. So I was now ahead. So although we had all these issues, crashed my bike in Chile, you know, got knocked off my bike in Colombia, I was always now ahead of the world record. There was never a stage that I was behind or chasing it. And so for me, that was helping me confidence wise. I took 10 days off the South America world record, and got into North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead. So I'm like, perfect. So, at this point, I'm like, smashed the world record. Hopefully now all the issues are behind us, according to the previous record holders, but then my wife rings me. My wife's campaign director. She was running everything behind the scenes, doing all the fundraising as well. And she rang me 5 times after I got into Texas. So I thought there was something wrong with our kids. And she said, no. She goes, what do you wear to a royal wedding? I said, sorry. She said, what do you wear to the royal wedding? And she told me they'd been kindly invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding. I said, that's nice. She goes, no, you don't realize. I said, for you to get back in time for this wedding, you need to be finished by day 102. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. So all that effort I'd done for the 70 days had counted. But, I now had another target and another objective to go for. The luxury I had in North America compared to South America is I could cycle at night. I couldn't really do that down there. We had to be off the road in the evenings. And so I sort of took advantage of that and did a majority of my cycling at night. We had 17 days planned for North America. I cycled in 11 and a half days. And I was literally using the winds to my advantage. The winds would work against me sometimes in the day. So I'd just cycle at night when they'd subsided. So yeah, I didn't really see much of America in the daytime. And then I got to a town called Whitehorse about a week outside of where the finish was. The finish is in Prudhoe Bay. So the last 400 miles is where they film ice truckers. It's that road. Yeah, that's where I'm going. And I then get messages about a professional cyclist who has 3 other endurance world records, sponsored by Red Bull, young 26-year-old Austrian. He is a cyclist who's just come out on social media and said that he was going to cycle this in August and be the first man to do it under 100 days. So for me, I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So I couldn't. Every time I hit my objective kept moving. So I cycled for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in minus 18 to make sure that I came in the 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. So like I said, it wasn't the original plan, but just how it unfolded, and that's how it ended up. But where I was successful in that is probably I took a lot. I always say you can't be experienced without experiences. I take everything from my time in the special forces, private security, and I just dropped it into a sport of cycling. Is that, we had a plan which was good, but I was being reactive to situation changes on the ground. As the situation changed, you can't control the uncontrollable. I can't tell this guy he's not going to go do his world record. I can't tell Harry to change his wedding date. I can't change the winds. You just have to go with what's in front of you and react to that. And so that's where the success of this was being reactive to those situation changes.
I love that. Yeah, you can control the controllables and you're a gray man through and through.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Dean, this is incredible, man. I really appreciate this. I've a million more questions, but I know you got to go. Tell my audience where they can learn more about you and tell them about your podcast too.
Yeah, so you can find me on www.deanstott.com or on Instagram. We have a podcast called Behind the Scene Podcast where I've talked about my wife a lot in this because my wife is crucial in this. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for her and the work that she does alongside me. And so I've seen this before in sports people, successful business people, TV stars, celebrities, is you see, people would see me on the bike ride, but they wouldn't see the team around me. In the special forces, the ratio we have is for every operator to go on the ground, it takes 7 other people in the military you don't see. And so it's bringing credit to those. And it wouldn't be successful if one of them wasn't doing their job properly. And so really we get guests on and we talk about them, but we then bring their partners on. I mean, you soon then realize actually, it is a teamwork. It is a partnership. In marriages, a man and a woman will come together. They'll fall in love. Prior to that, their aspirations, their dreams. But then when they want to start a family, unfortunately, it's normally the women that have to put their career on pause, to get pregnant and then to bring up the children. And then the husband's carrying on with his dreams. achieving his goals. And there can be a bit of resentment sometimes that you went off and did that and I had to stay at home, whereas Alana and I are proof that you can actually both be very successful if working together. And so that's the purpose of the podcast. It's called Behind the Scene, SWEN. And like I said, we're still doing a lot more now. We did evacuations in Afghanistan, because the book takes you up to 2018. Since then we've moved to America. We had the Afghan evacuations last year, did the Israel evacuations. I've done Netflix shows. There's a lot more. So probably need to put pen to paper and write another book soon.
Yeah, we need a sequel.
Yeah, Relentless 2, quite easy.
Well, Dean, thank you so much, man. Congratulations on all your success, and thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.